My name is Eleanor, though most people call me Ellie. I'm 33 years old, and up until about 6 weeks ago, I was my family's designated punching bag, both figuratively and, as it turned out, literally. During our annual Prescott family reunion, in front of 41 of our closest relatives, my own father struck me across the face. The crime I had committed? Daring to stand up for myself for the first time in my life. But the most chilling part wasn't the impact. It was the sound that followed. My mother's high, nervous laughter and my brother Mark's slow, deliberate clapping, punctuated by his satisfied pronouncement, "Serves you right." They had no idea that the quiet, compliant daughter they had spent a lifetime molding into a doormat had secretly forged the tools to bring their entire world crashing down. That very night, I made 3 phone calls that would unravel the Prescott dynasty forever. Before I get into the details of my story, I'd love it if you dropped a comment to let me know where you're listening from, and don't forget to subscribe if you enjoy what you hear. Growing up in the affluent suburb of Lake Forest, Illinois, felt like performing in a play where I was the only one who hadn't been given a script. Our sprawling 6-bedroom Tudor home, with its perfectly manicured gardens and ivy-covered walls, was the very picture of old money elegance. It was a beautiful stage, but behind the heavy oak doors, I learned a brutal lesson early on. My worth wasn't inherent. It was something to be earned, measured solely by how well I could orbit my father, Walter Prescott. Dad had built Prescott Capital Management from a small 2-man operation into a behemoth in the financial world, a regional powerhouse managing billions. But his Midas touch in the market was paired with a volcanic temper at home. Our house was a psychological minefield. A misplaced word, a grade that was an A- instead of an A, a hint of an opinion that diverged from his own. Any of these could trigger an eruption. His rage was the stuff of family legend, a dark secret meticulously concealed from his business partners and country club friends. A Prescott never shows weakness, he'd thunder across the dinner table. A Prescott commands respect. But in the Prescott household, respect was a currency that flowed in only one direction, straight to him. He demanded it, yet he dispensed none, especially not to me. My mother, Helen, was his most devoted acolyte, playing the role of the flawless society wife with an artist's dedication. Her platinum blonde hair was always coiffed, her designer outfits were timeless, and her smile was a permanent fixture, ready for any social engagement. But when the doors were closed, that smile would vanish, and she would become my father's chief enabler. "Your father has sacrificed so much for this family, Eleanor," she would murmur, dabbing at my tears with a silk handkerchief after one of his verbal assaults. "The very least you can do is try not to provoke him. You know how he gets." Then there was my brother, Mark. 3 years my senior, he was the undisputed golden child, the heir apparent. He was a carbon copy of our father in ambition and arrogance, and he'd walked straight from his Ivy League graduation into a cushy vice president role at Prescott Capital. While I starved for a single crumb of paternal praise, Mark feasted on a banquet of it. "That's my boy," Dad would boom, slapping Mark on the back for closing a deal or winning a golf tournament. "He's got the Prescott instinct for the kill." My own accomplishments were met with a wall of indifference. When I graduated with high honors from the University of Chicago, holding a dual degree in finance and economics, my father's only reaction was a cursory nod. "Let's hope you can actually do something with that," he'd said, before turning his attention back to the financial news. I can still feel the sting of that moment, sitting alone in my empty dorm room, the weight of my diploma in my hands, wondering why the approval I craved was always just out of reach. Yet a foolish, desperate part of me refused to stop trying. Despite his dismissal, I threw myself into my career. I became a financial analyst, driven by a quiet fury to prove him wrong. I climbed the corporate ladder, moving from one reputable firm to the next, each step a testament to my own grit and intellect, not the power of the Prescott name, but at our mandatory Sunday dinners, my career was treated like a quaint hobby. My professional successes were brushed aside as cute little stories to tell before the conversation inevitably turned back to Mark's latest triumph, or, more pointedly, my own personal failings. "Oh, Ellie is still playing at being a career woman," my mother would tell her friends at the charity galas I was guilted into attending. "But she'll come to her senses and find a good husband eventually. She's just a bit of a late bloomer." Those words were like tiny daggers, especially as I dedicated myself to my work, often pulling 60-hour weeks to secure a senior position. My personal life withered under the combined weight of my demanding career and my family's relentless disapproval. My last serious relationship imploded when my then-boyfriend David watched me cancel our planned anniversary trip to Napa because my mother had a last-minute emergency planning a fundraiser. "You will always choose them, Ellie," he said, his voice devoid of anger, just filled with a sad resignation as he packed his suitcase. "And the tragedy is, they don't even see you, let alone appreciate you." He wasn't wrong. I lived in the city, maintaining a physical distance, but emotionally I was still chained to their judgment. Every promotion was a silent plea for their respect. Every bonus was another brick in the wall I was building around myself, hoping it would one day be impressive enough for my father to notice. 2 months ago, the ground shifted beneath my feet. I was headhunted and offered a position as a senior financial strategist at Sterling Stone Advisory, one of the most respected and forward-thinking firms in the nation. The compensation package was staggering, nearly double my current salary. The role was a dream, a chance to work with a team I admired on accounts that would define my career. What sealed the deal for me was Sterling Stone's reputation. They were known for their unwavering ethical standards and radical transparency, principles I held dear in an industry often riddled with moral ambiguity. There was, however, one tiny complication. Sterling Stone sometimes found itself competing with Prescott Capital for high-net-worth clients. It wasn't a head-to-head war, but the overlap was significant enough that I knew my father would interpret my move as an act of treason. After weeks of agonizing, I accepted the offer. For the very first time in my 33 years, I put my own future ahead of the potential for family drama. With the annual Prescott reunion on the horizon, a naive and hopeful plan began to form in my mind. This would be the moment. I would announce my new role in front of everyone. Surely, I thought, an achievement of this magnitude would be undeniable. With 41 relatives as witnesses, even my father would have to offer a grudging congratulations. I could not have been more catastrophically, devastatingly wrong. The day of the reunion dawned bright and oppressively perfect. As I pulled my car into my parents' sweeping circular driveway, the lineup of gleaming Bentleys and imported sports cars felt like a show of force. I took a deep breath, smoothed down my conservative navy dress, and reapplied a layer of lipstick like a soldier putting on armor. I was a successful professional, on the cusp of even greater success. That knowledge would be my shield. My mother swung the door open before my hand even reached the bell, her critical eyes performing their usual swift, head-to-toe inventory. "Eleanor, darling, you finally made it." We were beginning to worry. She leaned in for her signature air kiss, a maneuver designed to avoid any contact that might smudge her flawless makeup. "That dress is a little severe for a family barbecue, don't you think? And you look exhausted. Are you eating properly?" Before I could formulate a response, she was already turning away, her voice carrying across the marble foyer as she called out to my Aunt Margaret about the new caterer. It was a familiar routine, a swift and efficient reminder of my place. I navigated the crowded house, exchanging forced smiles and hollow greetings with cousins and great aunts I hadn't seen in a year. My Uncle David and Aunt Carol actually seemed interested in my life, asking about my work until Mark appeared, sliding his arm around me in a gesture of false camaraderie. Little Ellie's still playing with her colorful charts. he announced to the room with a dismissive chuckle that vaporized my entire career into a childish pastime. Meanwhile, I just locked down the Henderson estate. 7 figures now, with the potential for 8 within the year. Aunt Carol's attention snapped to him instantly. "Oh, Mark, that's incredible. Your father must be bursting with pride." I quietly slipped out of his grasp and made my way to the sprawling back patio, where my father was holding court. He was in the middle of one of his favorite business war stories, a tumbler of aged scotch in one hand, a rapt audience of male relatives hanging on his every word. He glanced up, saw me, and gave a single curt nod before seamlessly continuing his monologue. It was an acknowledgement so minimal it felt like an insult. Throughout the long afternoon, the small dismissals accumulated, each one a fresh paper cut on my already wounded psyche. When I tried to contribute to a conversation about market volatility, my mother cut me off to ask if I'd found anyone special yet. When I offered to help in the kitchen, a great aunt patted my arm and wondered aloud why such a smart girl was still on the shelf at my age. When I joined a discussion about emerging tech stocks, Mark simply talked over me, raising his voice until I fell silent, my point left hanging, unheard in the humid air. The breaking point, the moment the last thread of my hope snapped, came when I was walking back from the upstairs bathroom. I overheard my parents' voices drifting from the kitchen. "Eleanor looks haggard," my mother said, her voice a low murmur. "All that work and no social life, it's aging her. If she just had a fraction of Mark's business sense, maybe the long hours would be worth it." My father's reply was a cold, pragmatic dismissal that hit me like a physical blow. "It's not worth it. She's always been soft, too concerned with ethics and feelings to make the hard decisions. That's why she'll never reach the top. She doesn't have what it takes." I froze in the hallway, the blood draining from my face. Their words echoed in the sudden, ringing silence of my mind. After 13 years of relentless work, of sacrificing my personal life, of pushing myself to the absolute limit, I was on the verge of reaching a professional peak they couldn't even fathom. And still, to them, I was the family's resident failure. At 4:30, my mother clapped her hands and announced that dinner would be served promptly at 6 in the formal dining room. As the crowd dispersed to freshen up, I retreated to my old childhood bedroom. It had been converted into a generic guest room, every trace of my existence scrubbed away. I sat on the edge of the perfectly made bed and stared at my reflection in the vanity mirror. The woman looking back wasn't the insecure girl who had fled this house for college. She was a poised, accomplished executive. I had earned my place in the world through my own intelligence and tireless effort. Why was I still begging for scraps of validation from people who had never once offered me a full meal? In that moment, something inside me hardened. The tectonic plates of my psyche shifted. I would still make my announcement at dinner, but it would no longer be a plea for their approval. It would be a declaration of my independence. I was done making myself small to protect their fragile egos. When I descended the grand staircase, the dining room was aglow. The colossal mahogany table, a relic of my great-grandfather's era, gleamed under the light of a crystal chandelier, set with my mother's finest china and silver, a battlefield prepared for its annual skirmish. My place card, as always, was relegated to the far end of the table, a strategic placement between a gossiping second cousin and a great-uncle whose hearing aid whistled intermittently. My father sat enthroned at the head of the table. Mark, his crown prince, was at his right hand, my mother, the queen consort, at his left. The Prescott family's inner circle had never been subtle. As uniformed servers began to bring out the first course, a thick soup of conversations bubbled around the table. Aunt Margaret's daughter was pregnant with her 3rd child. Cousin Stephen had bought a summer home in the Hamptons. Uncle Robert's youngest had just been accepted to Yale. I ate my lobster bisque in silence, my heart a steady, determined drum against my ribs, waiting for the perfect moment. It arrived during the main course, a brief lull in the chatter as 41 people focused on their filet mignon. "I have some news I'd like to share," I said. My voice, though quiet, was clear and steady, cutting through the low hum of the room. 41 pairs of eyes, a sea of varied curiosity and indifference, turned toward me. "I've accepted a new position," I announced, my shoulders squared. "I'll be starting next month as a senior financial strategist at Sterling Stone Advisory." For a heartbeat, there was an impressed silence. Then, the sharp clatter of my father's fork hitting his plate shattered the moment. "Sterling Stone," he repeated, his voice dangerously low. "My competitor." "They aren't a direct competitor, Dad," I clarified, keeping my tone even. "There's some market overlap, but our client bases and investment philosophies are quite different." "Different philosophies indeed," he sneered, his face beginning to darken. "They're a bunch of upstarts who undercut established firms with flashy presentations and progressive nonsense. A younger version of me would have shrunk back. But I was done shrinking. Actually, they're renowned for their ethical practices and transparency," I corrected him, the words leaving my mouth before I could second-guess them. "Their client retention rate is the highest in the industry because they deliver results without predatory fees or creative accounting." The silence that fell over the table was absolute. No one ever contradicted Walter Prescott, especially not at his own dinner table, and most assuredly, not his own daughter. "What exactly?" he asked, his voice dropping to that terrifyingly quiet register that always preceded an explosion. "Are you implying about my business?" I should have backed down. For 33 years, that was my function, to de-escalate, to apologize, to retreat. But sitting there, surrounded by the faces of those who had silently witnessed my slow erasure year after year, I found I had no retreat left in me. "I'm not implying anything about your business, Dad. I'm telling you about mine. I'm telling you about an opportunity I earned. I earned it with hard work and a proven track record, not with a family connection. And for once in my life, I would appreciate it if you could just say, 'Congratulations.'" The silence stretched into an eternity. I could hear the faint ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall, a sound that had marked the time of my childhood misery. My father's face was a canvas of escalating rage, shifting from crimson to a deep, alarming purple. "Congratulations," he finally spat, the word dripping with venom. "You want congratulations for betraying this family? For taking every lesson I ever taught you and handing it over to my rivals?" "This has nothing to do with you," I shot back, my voice trembling but firm. "This is about my career, my life. Sterling Stone is giving me a chance to shape company-wide strategy and manage their most important accounts, while using insider knowledge of my firm's operations," he roared, his voice rising. "Knowledge you've gathered sitting at this very table." A few relatives shifted uncomfortably. My cousin Eliza became intensely fascinated with the pattern on her plate. Uncle Robert fumbled with his tie. "That's absurd," I said, my own anger now rising to meet his. "I am a professional with my own expertise. I have never and would never use proprietary information inappropriately." My mother placed a placating hand on my father's arm, but her words were like throwing kerosene on a bonfire. "Richard, darling, perhaps Eleanor didn't think it through. She's always been a bit rash when it comes to her career. I'm sure she can just call them in the morning and politely decline." "I'm not declining anything," I stated, my voice like ice. "I signed the contract. I start in 2 weeks." Mark let out a short, condescending laugh. Classic Ellie. Always so sure she knows best. Dad's been running a billion-dollar firm for 30 years. But please, tell us more about how the industry works. "I never said that," I retorted, my frustration boiling over. "This isn't a competition. This is about my right to have my own professional life, independent of all of you. Your professional life." My father's voice boomed, rattling the crystal glasses. "You wouldn't have a career if I hadn't paid for that fancy, overpriced education. Everything you are is because of me, because of this family." "I put myself through graduate school," I corrected him, my voice shaking with a decade of repressed truth. and I paid back every single cent of my undergraduate loans. My career is mine. I built it. How dare you, he thundered, slamming his fist on the table with such force that the water glasses jumped and wine sloshed onto the white tablecloth. After everything we've given you, this is the gratitude you show? You become a corporate traitor. The accusations were familiar, a well-worn script designed to make me cower and apologize. But the script had changed because I had changed. This is exactly why I never share my life with you, I said, my voice gaining strength with every word. You can't stand the idea that I've built something on my own, that I don't need your money or your connections, that I am my own person, separate from the Prescott name. My mother gasped audibly. Eleanor, you will apologize to your father this instant. For what? I demanded, turning to face her. For having a thought of my own? For succeeding? For refusing to play small just to protect his ego? My father shoved his chair back so violently that it tipped over, crashing against the hardwood floor with a deafening crack. He stood there, his fists clenched, his face a mask of pure fury. You ungrateful little bitch, he snarled, a word so vile I had never heard it pass his lips. You think you're anything without this family? You're nothing. Walter, my Aunt Margaret exclaimed, her voice a shocked whisper. But he was beyond reason, his rage transforming him into a stranger. He began stalking around the long table toward me, and I watched as my relatives physically recoiled, sinking back into their chairs. I stood my ground. I am done, I said, my voice low but carrying. I am done trying to earn something you are incapable of giving. He reached my end of the table before anyone could move, though looking back, I know no one even tried. What happened next was a blur of motion. His right hand swung in a wide, vicious arc, his fist adorned with the heavy gold signet ring he always wore, connected with my left cheekbone. The force of the blow snapped my head to the side and I stumbled backward, hitting the wall. An explosion of white-hot pain seared across my face. I tasted the coppery tang of blood as my teeth sliced into the inside of my cheek. The room erupted in a cacophony of gasps and shocked murmurs. But through the ringing in my ears, I heard two sounds that cut deeper than any physical pain ever could. First, my mother's light, nervous laugh, the same one she used when a guest spilled wine or told an inappropriate joke. Walter, really, she chided, as if he'd committed a minor social faux pas. Not at dinner. And then, Mark's voice, clear and chillingly satisfied. Serves you right. Maybe that will finally knock some sense into you. Slowly, I straightened up, one hand pressed to my throbbing face. I scanned the table. 41 faces stared back at me, a gallery of shock, discomfort, and morbid fascination. Not a single person moved to help me. Not one voice was raised in my defense. A drop of blood fell from my split lip, landing on the pristine white tablecloth. A perfect crimson stain on the facade of our perfect family. Without another word, I turned and walked. I walked steadily out of the dining room, through the silent kitchen, and out the side door into the cool night air. No one called my name. No one followed. As I drove away from the house that had been my first prison, I glanced in the rearview mirror. My cheek was already beginning to swell, a dark, angry mark blooming under my eye. The physical pain was a dull ache. Nothing compared to the violent, final shattering of the illusion that I had a family at all. I drove on autopilot, my mind a blizzard of shock and adrenaline, until I found a generic chain hotel 20 miles away. At the front desk, I kept the injured side of my face turned away from the night clerk, mumbling about needing a room. He was more interested in his phone, barely glancing up as he slid a keycard across the counter. Once inside the sterile, anonymous room, I finally faced myself in the bathroom mirror. The damage was stark. A deep purplish bruise was spreading across my cheekbone. My lower lip was split and swollen. I looked like a victim, and the sight of it filled me with a toxic cocktail of shame and white-hot rage. For 33 years, I had been the family's shock absorber, the one who smoothed over arguments, who swallowed insults, who made herself smaller to avoid threatening the fragile men in her life. And this was my reward, a punch to the face in front of everyone I knew, followed by laughter and applause. I checked my phone. The screen was black. No missed calls, no text messages, not from my mother, asking if I was hurt. Not from any of the 41 witnesses to my assault. Not even from Aunt Carol, who had always given me pitying looks across the holiday table. Their silence was an answer louder than any scream. It confirmed the family's unwritten law. My safety, my dignity, my very being were irrelevant when weighed against the need to maintain the Prescott family myth. I sat on the edge of the stiff hotel bed, an ice pack from the vending machine pressed to my face, and I let the memories come. I let myself remember all the moments I had spent a lifetime trying to forget. Me at age 8, crying in my room because I'd won the school science fair, but my father was too busy celebrating Mark's new golf handicap to even look at my project. Me at 13, overhearing my mother on the phone with a friend, saying that while Mark had inherited the Prescott business gene, I would hopefully at least marry well. Me at 17, winning a national economics essay contest, only to have my father speculate that the judges must have been going easy on the girls that year. Me at 25, bringing home my first serious boyfriend, only to have my father cross-examine him like a hostile witness while my mother spent the evening critiquing my dress, my cooking, and my posture. And the most painful one, a memory I had buried deep. Me at 28, being passed over for a promotion I deserved, only to find out months later that my father had secretly called the managing partner to express his concerns that I wasn't ready for that kind of pressure. The pattern wasn't just clear, it was a life sentence, and it would never end unless I ended it. I opened my laptop and connected to my secure work server. During my due diligence before accepting the Sterling Stone offer, I had done a deep dive into my father's firm to identify any potential conflicts of interest. What I had uncovered had made my stomach turn, but at the time, a misplaced sense of family loyalty had stopped me from looking too closely. His firm, Prescott Capital, was a house of cards. I found evidence of systemic overbilling, tax strategies that danced on the knife's edge of illegality, and at least 3 major accounts where investment performance had been deliberately misrepresented to clients. It was a pattern of behavior that, if exposed, would not just trigger regulatory action, it would obliterate the firm's reputation and incite a client exodus. I had saved the encrypted files, telling myself it was just professional thoroughness. But now, staring at the folder on my desktop, I realized some part of me had always been preparing for this moment. The moment when my loyalty to a family that didn't love me would finally clash with my own integrity. My father's empire was built on fear. Employees who dared to question his methods were fired and found themselves blacklisted. Clients who complained were buried in legal threats. Family members who challenged him were publicly humiliated and cut off. For the first time, I let myself see the power I held not as a threat, but as a tool for justice. I had my own reputation, my own network, and I had the proof. I had the means to hold him accountable, not just for a lifetime of emotional cruelty, but for his professional sins as well. It wasn't a simple decision. Exposing him would have collateral damage. It would affect the livelihoods of innocent employees. It would shatter my mother's social standing, the only thing she truly cherished. It would vaporize Mark's inheritance. It would detonate a bomb in the middle of our extended family. But what was the alternative? To allow the abuse to continue? To let him get away with it all, yet again? To do so would mean the final destruction of myself. The punch hadn't just bruised my face, it had made visible the violence that had been simmering beneath the surface of our family for decades. As midnight bled into the early morning hours, I made 3 lists: the people who could help, the potential outcomes of action versus inaction, and what I truly wanted to achieve. This wasn't just about revenge, it was about accountability. By 1 in the morning, my path was clear. I had 3 calls to make, 3 conversations that would set in motion forces he could not control, 3 levers that would ensure Walter Prescott would finally face the consequences of his actions. I placed my phone on the nightstand, a strange sense of peace washing over me. Tomorrow, the war would begin. But tonight, for the first time in as long as I could remember, I could rest. I woke the next morning to the throbbing in my cheek, but my mind was a sea of calm. The silence of the hotel room was a balm. I checked my phone. Still nothing. Their continued silence was all the confirmation I needed. After a hot shower and a careful application of concealer that did little to hide the angry bruise, I sat at the small desk and prepared for the first call. The contact was saved in my phone as Robert Evans was a senior investigator at the SEC's Division of Enforcement. I had met him years ago at an industry conference on compliance, and we'd maintained a casual professional relationship, grabbing coffee once or twice a year to talk shop. I dialed his direct line. He picked up on the 3rd ring. "Eleanor, what a surprise. Everything okay?" His voice was friendly but carried an undercurrent of professional caution. "Not exactly, Robert," I replied, my own voice steady. "I need to talk to you about something urgent and highly sensitive. Do you have time to meet today?" There was a short pause. "Of course." "Is this related to your work, or is it personal?" "It's both," I said. "I have credible documentation of what I believe are significant financial improprieties at Prescott Capital Management." Another pause. This one longer. "Your father's firm." "Yes." "That's a major allegation, Eleanor. Are you absolutely certain you want to open this door?" "I am," I said, the words tasting like freedom. "Something happened that has made it impossible for me to stay silent any longer." We agreed to meet at a quiet coffee shop near his office at 11. Before he hung up, Robert added, "And Eleanor? Document everything that happened to you personally. Take photos, write down a detailed account. It may become relevant." I did exactly as he said, clinically photographing my bruised face from every angle, then writing a dispassionate step-by-step account of the previous night. The act of documenting it helped me create a necessary emotional distance. At 11 o'clock, I was sitting across from Robert in a secluded booth. He winced when he saw my face up close. "I think," he said gently, "we should start with what happened to you." I gave him the condensed version of the story. The dinner, the announcement, my father's violent rage, and the complicity of my mother and brother. He took notes, his expression growing more grim with every detail. "Have you gone to the police?" he asked. "Not yet? That's my 2nd call today." He nodded, his face unreadable. "All right. Show me what you have on the firm." I opened my laptop and walked him through the files. Spreadsheets showing manipulated client fees, tax filings with highly questionable write-offs, internal emails discussing strategies to circumvent reporting laws, and side-by-side comparisons of actual investment returns versus the inflated numbers reported to clients. Robert spent nearly an hour poring over the data, his questions sharp and precise. Finally, he closed the laptop. "This is more than enough to launch a formal investigation," he said, his voice low. "Some of this crosses the line from aggressive accounting into outright fraud. You understand what that means for your father?" "I do," I said. "And you're willing to testify?" "Yes. I can't be complicit anymore." "I'll need copies of all of this," he said, gathering his things. "My team will start immediately, but you need to be prepared. Once your father gets wind of an official SEC investigation, the backlash against you could be severe." "I understand," I said. "Thank you, Robert." As he left, he placed a hand on my arm. "What you're doing takes a hell of a lot of courage, Eleanor. Take care of yourself." My 2nd call was to Laura Chen, one of the city's most formidable family law attorneys, specializing in high-asset domestic violence cases. Her office was in a restored brownstone, designed to feel more like a sanctuary than a legal firm. She listened to my entire story without a single interruption, her gaze both compassionate and intensely focused. When I finished, she leaned forward. "First thing we're doing is filing for an emergency order of protection," she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. "With your visible injuries and 41 witnesses, we have more than enough grounds. Will it be enough to protect me?" I asked, the reality of my father's power and influence a cold weight in my stomach. "The restraining order is the first step," she explained. "The second is filing criminal assault charges. We are going to document every single interaction from this point forward. Every text, every call, every accidental encounter. We will build an ironclad case." "My family will lie," I warned her. "They'll say I provoked him, or that it wasn't as bad as I'm making it out to be." "That's standard procedure in families with this kind of pathology," Laura said calmly. "But your face tells a story they can't deny. And sometimes, when one person finally breaks the silence, others find the courage to speak up too." We spent the next 2 hours on paperwork. Laura had a paralegal photograph my injuries for the official record and prepared the petition for the restraining order. When I left her office, the gears of the legal system were grinding into motion. "A sheriff will serve him within 24 hours, she told me. "He will be legally barred from contacting you or coming within 500 feet of you, your home, or your place of work. If he violates that order in any way, he will be arrested on the spot." My third and final call was to Daniel Reed, an investigative journalist with a national reputation for exposing corporate malfeasance. We'd connected the year before when he'd interviewed me as an anonymous source for a piece on gender bias in the financial sector. He agreed to meet me at a discreet restaurant on the city's outskirts, far from the prying eyes of the financial district. Daniel arrived in jeans and a rumpled shirt, his usual tailored suit absent, a nod to the clandestine nature of our meeting. His eyes widened in shock when he saw my bruised cheek. "Jesus, Ellie! What happened?" "My father happened," I replied, my voice flat. "And it's connected to why I called you." Over a meal neither of us touched, I laid out the entire story, the corrupt foundation of Prescott Capital, the tyrannical family dynamic it funded, and the act of violence that had finally forced my hand. I told him about the SEC investigation and the criminal charges, but explained that public accountability was just as crucial. "Financial predators thrive in the dark," I said. "My father built an empire by exploiting people's trust, all while cultivating a public image as a pillar of the community." Daniel listened, his pen flying across his notepad. "This is a massive story," he said when I finished. "A titan of finance with a history of fraud, whose public persona is a cover for private violence. Are you ready for the fallout when this goes live?" "I understand the consequences," I said. "I can give you hard documentation for every financial claim. The personal side is my word against theirs, but my injuries speak for themselves. And you're willing to be a named source?" he asked. I hesitated. "For the assault, yes. That will be public record anyway. For the financial investigation, I'd prefer to remain anonymous for now, at least until the SEC makes its move." Daniel nodded. "We can do that. I'll need to verify everything independently and give your father's firm a chance to comment before we publish. That process can take a few weeks." "That's fine," I said. "I don't want a sloppy hit piece. I want a meticulously researched story that will withstand the legal storm I know is coming." As we parted ways, Daniel looked at me, his expression serious. "Are you sure about this, Ellie? Once this train leaves the station, there's no stopping it." I gently touched the tender skin on my cheek. "I'm sure," I said. "The time for being silent is over." That night, I checked into a new hotel under a different name and turned off my phone. The calls were made. The wheels were in motion. For the first time, I had chosen truth over the toxic illusion of family. I slept for 12 straight hours, a deep, dreamless sleep, as my body finally began to release the tension I'd been carrying for a lifetime. When I finally woke and powered my phone back on, it exploded. 32 missed calls from my mother, 19 from Mark, and 6 from my father himself, a direct violation of the restraining order that had clearly been served. The text messages were a deluge of panic and rage. Eleanor called me this instant. Your father is apoplectic. This is a private family matter, and you will not humiliate us like this. That was my mother. What the hell did you do? A sheriff just showed up at the house. You need to fix this now. That was Mark, and from my father. You have made a catastrophic mistake. Call me before you make it worse. I methodically screenshotted every message and forwarded them to Laura Chen as evidence. Then I checked the news. The silence before the storm. It was only a matter of time. A week bled into 2. I'd taken a formal leave of absence from Sterling Stone, explaining only that I was dealing with a critical family emergency. To their immense credit, they were incredibly supportive, extending my start date by a month. No questions asked. I lived like a fugitive, moving between hotels every few days as Laura had advised, knowing my father had the resources to find me if he became desperate enough. On the 10th day after my calls, the first grenade landed. A headline on a major financial news site, Prescott Capital Management under SEC investigation for alleged fee manipulation and client fraud. The article was careful not to name me, but it detailed the exact issues I had given to Robert Evans. My father's firm issued a furious denial, calling the allegations baseless smears from jealous competitors. 3 days later, the second, more personal grenade hit. Lake Forest CEO Walter Prescott faces assault charges in domestic dispute. This article cited public court filings confirming the existence of the restraining order and the criminal complaint. My world erupted. My phone became a conduit for the shockwaves. Aunts and uncles texted, their messages a mix of feigned concern and outright anger that I had aired our dirty laundry. Old colleagues reached out, some with genuine support, others fishing for gossip. I ignored them all, following Laura's strict instructions to maintain radio silence. By the 3rd week, the dominoes were falling fast. Prescott Capital's share price had cratered, losing over 30% of its value as panicked clients initiated a mass exodus. My father had been forced by his board to take a temporary leave of absence. My mother canceled her highly anticipated annual charity ball. Mark called me 22 times in a single day, his messages devolving from furious threats to pathetic, desperate pleas. Do you have any idea what you've done? His final, choked voicemail demanded. Dad's reputation is ruined. Mom can't even show her face at the yacht club. The firm is collapsing. All because you couldn't handle a little criticism. You've destroyed this family, Ellie, out of spite. His words were a chilling confirmation of his worldview. To him, a grown man punching his daughter was a little criticism, and holding him accountable was spite. He truly was his father's son, in business and in moral bankruptcy. 4 weeks to the day after the reunion, the end game began. The SEC investigation had uncovered even more than I had provided, triggering a parallel investigation by the IRS. 3 of my father's former employees, emboldened by the news reports, had come forward as whistleblowers. A class action lawsuit was filed on behalf of hundreds of clients. Then, the image that would be replayed on a loop on every business channel, Walter Prescott, in a tailored suit, being led from his office in handcuffs. That same week, my mother reportedly had a nervous collapse during a luncheon, fueling long, whispered rumors about her dependence on pills and alcohol. Justin's attempts to salvage the company were futile. The board suspended all executive compensation and dividend payments, effectively cutting off my family's source of wealth. Then came the call I'd been waiting for, my mother using a number I didn't recognize. "We know it was you," she said, her voice thin and brittle, stripped of its usual melodic grace. "The lawyers told us. You gave them the documents. You betrayed us. Are you happy now? Are you satisfied that you've burned it all to the ground?" "I wanted accountability, Mom," I said, my voice calm. "Accountability for the clients he robbed, for the employees he terrorized, for every time you both made me feel worthless. And yes, for punching me in the face because I had the audacity to be proud of myself. It was one mistake, she shrieked. One moment. He lost his temper after you deliberately provoked him. It was the final act in a lifetime of abuse, I corrected her. And when you laughed, you told me everything I needed to know. There was a long silence on the line. When she spoke again, her tone had shifted. It was cold, calculating. You do realize what this has done to the Prescott name, don't you? It's poison. Your precious new firm won't want anything to do with you once they connect you to this mess. I could almost feel sorry for her. They already know everything, Mom, I informed her. I disclosed the entire situation before I accepted their offer. Unlike Dad, I believe in transparency. I could almost hear the gears grinding in her head as her reality crumbled. The moment she realized the meek, obedient daughter had been playing chess while they were all playing checkers. You planned this, she whispered, the words full of dawning horror. All of it. No, Mom, I said, a wave of sadness washing over me. Dad planned this, with every cruel word, every shady deal, and every choice he made for the last 30 years. I just finally stopped protecting him from the consequences. After I hung up, I sat in the quiet of my new apartment for a long time, grappling with the strange cocktail of grief and liberation. The family I had so desperately wanted was gone, its glittering facade reduced to ash and rubble. And yet, standing in the wreckage, I felt myself breathing freely for the first time. 6 months have passed. My father took a plea deal, pleading guilty to misdemeanor assault and a slate of financial regulatory violations. He received 5 years of probation, crippling fines, and has been permanently barred from the securities industry. Prescott Capital was sold for parts, the proceeds devoured by lawsuits and penalties. My mother, faced with social ruin and a drastically reduced lifestyle, filed for divorce after 36 years of marriage. Mark, his name Toxic, is now selling insurance for a distant cousin in Ohio. The extended family fractured. Some have cut me off completely. Others, like my Aunt Carol, reached out with quiet support, sharing their own stories of my father's intimidation. What you did took a courage I wish I'd had 30 years ago, she wrote in a long, heartfelt email. It might have saved you from so much pain. My own healing is a work in progress. I'm in therapy, untangling the complex knots of my childhood. There are days I'm crushed by guilt, and nights I grieve for the family I never had. But there is also joy. My friendships are deeper. I'm rediscovering parts of myself I had locked away. And at Sterling Stone, my career is thriving. My willingness to expose misconduct, even at such a personal cost, has been seen not as a liability, but as a mark of profound integrity. Last week, a letter arrived with my mother's elegant handwriting on the envelope. It was a rambling, self-pitying tirade that, near the end, stumbled into something resembling introspection. I still think you went too far, she wrote, but I have been thinking about what you said. I see now that your father and I rarely gave your accomplishments the respect they deserved. I am trying to understand how that must have felt. It wasn't an apology, not really, but it was a start. A year after that fateful dinner, my life is unrecognizable. The constant gnawing anxiety that was my lifelong companion has faded to a dull hum. The reflexive need to make myself small has vanished. I am no longer starving for approval from people who are incapable of giving it. I have found my own. The cost of this freedom was immense, but the freedom itself is priceless. I learned that family isn't just about blood. It's about respect and support and love. The family I was born into failed me on every count. But the family I am now building for myself, one healthy relationship at a time, is proving to be my true home. The greatest lesson was the simplest. We teach people how to treat us. For 33 years, I taught my family that I would accept disrespect as the price of admission. The moment I refused to pay that price was the moment my real life began. If you've ever found yourself at a similar crossroads, torn between family loyalty and your own self-worth, please know that there is life on the other side of that impossible choice. It might not be the life you planned, but it will be a life where you can finally, truly be yourself. What would you have done if you were in my shoes? Have you ever had to make a choice between keeping the peace and standing up for what's right? I'd love to read your stories in the comments below. And if my journey resonated with you, please like this video and subscribe for more stories about healing and setting boundaries. Thank you for listening. And please remember that you deserve to be treated with dignity and respect, always.